Come on down, we'll have a seat. Welcome everybody. Here just in time for orientation. How cool is that? Hello. Welcome, welcome.
Well, you all saw the Wolf Creek video, so you've you already know a lot more about what we need to keep in mind here at Wolf Creek. So this will be probably a reminder for some of you. Oh, are we waiting?
No, go ahead. We'll take
Okay. Okay, so first and foremost, welcome to Wolf Creek. You are in a national park, and people get a little bit confused sometimes because we are adjacent to Prairie Creek Redwood State Park, but technically, if there's boundaries, this is the national park part of our Redwood National and State Parks. So yes, so we're a big partnership. So just a really quick, so Redwood National and State Parks is one big partnership. So we have 3 state parks in the national park boundaries. Prairie Creek is one of them, right next to us. We have Del Norte Coast Redwoods up in the north part of the park, and also Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park. Those were all created first. So they have the majority of old growth, actually. So that's always the interesting thing. People come to Redwood National Park, like, wait, but there's state, there's federal, you know, a lot of old growth is in the national park. We want to see the old growth in, or in the state parks, we want to see the old growth in the national park. Technically, we're all one big park. So those were all created first in the 1920s. And so that's why they have a majority of old growth. You're gonna actually get to go. There's the phone. You all have your satellite internet too for emergencies. Now I will tell you the back, so there is, just in case, about power, things go out here at Wolf Creek. There is a phone in the back. That back phone does connect directly to a phone line. So that is your lifeline if power does happen to go out and there's an emergency. There's instructions on that back. Just when in doubt, look around. There's signs really well here at Wolf Creek. In case there is an emergency, there's a number on the back phone to call, and it's called NORCOM, and it's on that back phone number, and that will actually get in touch with our law enforcement, and they will be able to get personnel here quicker, believe it or not, than 911. So that's to keep that in mind. All you that stuff. And you'll show you all of that. But that's back there. Keep that in mind. So that's a big one too. There are first aid kits. You'll see where those are, and I'm sure you have your own as well. But we have an AED, which I did just check the battery is currently working. There's all of that in the back hall as well, which makes it.
But you've all signed a waiver, so there will be no injuries or anything.
Right. Yep. That's all there. So yeah, like I said, you'll get a further instructions and all of that. Restrooms, ooh, that is the big one. We do ask that you keep your toiletries inside of the bathrooms, which you saw on the Wolf Creek video. Inside the bathrooms, there's those cubbies, because those, believe it or not, people don't think about that, having an odor, they could potentially also attract wild animals into cabins and things. I know, like in Yellowstone, that's definitely in places where there's more bear activity, that can definitely be a concern. But I also say we don't want to start having a concern here in this area in Wolf Creek because of that. So prevention is one of the biggest things we can do here. So by helping prevent that. So yes, just keep those toiletries. Now medicine, that's something, if you need that right away, that's something that usually doesn't have an odor. You can keep that in the cabin with you if you need that, because I know that's important as well. So yeah. If they haven't done it yet, I need to turn on. There is a path that leads down, as you can see, to all of the cabins. There's a little light on there. Just reminded myself, I will turn that light on for you. There's one up to the back amphitheater as well that leads up to our campfire rings. So, yeah. Which you'll see the trail maps. Wolf Creek has its own trail system, so I'm sure you'll go over that as well. Are there any specific questions? Any facility questions that you can think of? Any park questions? I'm sure there'll be plenty of them. I'll be around, if you have any questions, you can ask. There's going to be different people talking with you, rangers, other people, if you have questions for them. Oh, I did want to mention, he's not here, but I want to show you. Johnny Mack is our facilities, kind of maintenance, kind of all too. He has been working in the park longer than I have, so he is a little bit shy. But if you have questions about anything, he definitely can answer them as well. So, yeah. Is there any other thoughts? Hopefully you will get to see the elk. How many of you saw the elk already? Yay! There There was, I counted 9. Did anybody count more than that? Yeah, so there was, we have a group. Yeah, they were right here. We have a group of 11, around 11 bulls, 11 to 14. Sometimes it's a few more join the herd. But at the Prairie Creek Visitor Center area over there, we have about 11-ish bulls that kind of hang out all of the time. They're a bachelor herd, you know, so they're the ones that kind of just hang out together all the time. They like to frequent, as you will see on our field, there are patties, elk patties out there. Now, guys, I've had that question. People always ask, well, you know, thought that it was more pellets. Well, in this area, look at how much greenery there is. If you've ever seen cattle when they have lots of green vegetation, green food, it's patties, right? So our elk can range from the little pellets to when there's lots of greenery, cow patties, basically. Elk patties. Yeah. Cow and bull patties. Yeah. So you'll see that out here. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Is there any thoughts? Daisha, do you have anything that you?
No, I think we're good. We'll
Okay.
Cover a bunch more tonight
Yeah.
and talk about other things. And
I
Laura
figured you
will be
would.
presenting the hydrology program, our water testing, and also our old growth. And we will be 6th graders.
Yes.
6th graders
Yeah.
during that time. And
Between 4th and 6th, you can pick your.
so we'll go over all the schedules tonight and everything like that.
Yeah, I think that's all. I know that you're going to go over a lot of things too, so I don't want to keep you too long.
So dinner's at 5:30. If you just got here and you need to do all the things, come back and see the ambassadors over here and they'll get you into your rooms. And we will see you guys at 5:30 inside the lodge. All right, sounds good?
Thank you. On a really fun excursion on Wednesday where we talk about a lot about second growth management, because the national park itself it's really 70% second growth, so old growth trees, because it wasn't created till much later in the 1960s, 1968. So most of the trees in the national park were actually already harvested when it was acquired and made a national park. So that's why the national park does not have a lot of old growth itself, and the state parks all have those large tracts of old growth because they were created in the 1920s. So that's where that confusion gets. So then the national park was created around the state parks to continue to protect the land, but also people don't think about this, also all of the wildlife that lives here, particularly the elk that we hopefully will get to see again come through Wolf Creek, because they need, you know, they're a large animal, they need a lot of land. Just protecting the state parks was not doing it. They actually dwindled down to like 12 elk in all of Northern California, like 100 elk total, but like 12 in this area. And now we have thousands now that the surrounding areas are protected. So people think about, you know, we're here to protect the trees, but also the wildlife that live in this area too. So anyway, the national park was created. Then we had separate entities. So then finally they decided, let's make it just one big park instead of having state and federal government having their own lands, you know, that kind of thing. So now it is now Redwood in not that long ago, 1990s, became the partnership with Redwood National and State Parks. So now we actually have, you know, state park rangers law enforcement can do things here, national park rangers, they all work together as one big collaboration. You'll see NPS, you know, uniforms, you'll see state park uniforms, people doing lots of different things in the park because we're one big national park. So there's a little bit of history of why state, why federal. We're one big park. We're actually super unique to this area. We actually can do some really awesome things because we are a national and state park, where some national parks they don't get to do certain things with, you know, when we can do, because the state parks are a part of our partnership. So we get to what we call leverage that partnership here in this park, which is very cool, unique experience, and it's unique to this area. So little history about that. So I mentioned that we have some logging history. So as you can see, Wolf Creek has some large stumps. So this is actually part of that second growth that we were talking about. So Wolf Creek Education Center, when the park created, or the national park was created, we had this area that was actually a logging camp. So that's what Wolf Creek Education Center was originally, and that's why it's called Wolf Creek, because it was actually owned by Wolf Creek Logging Company they were from Oregon. So we've just continued on that name because learning from history is also a really important thing. So you can see some of those large stumps around here. We will get to discover the old growth that we have here at Wolf Creek tomorrow when we do our old growth program. So just keep that in mind. Stumpy is one of those stumps. You can hang out on Stumpy, you can play on Stumpy. Always remind students, just don't, no horseplay on Stumpy. And I know, you guys, we're all kids at heart, right? So one thing to keep in mind is if you are tempted to climb on some of these really large stumps, that's where all the bees are found, so just to let you know. We usually say Stumpy is safe because it's been loved by lots and lots of students over the years, and people and visitors. So Stumpy is a safe place to hang out and play. And do the fun things. There's also the fun stump behind Stumpy that's called Secret Stumpy. Check that out. You can go inside. It's a really fun hollow stump that's even bigger than Stumpy. So check things out. It's a really fun area around here. We're going to talk more about the Redwood Rising Project on Wednesday because you may have seen some large equipment as you came in through here up in our upper parking area. And that's part of what we call our Redwood Rising Project, which is actually second growth management. But I don't want to talk too much because I don't want to take away from Jason's presentation and talk. But that's kind of what's been going on and what you'll see, some of that on the road. So just keep that in mind if you're driving in and out of Wolf Creek, that there could be logging trucks coming in and out of the road because the project is happening right behind us. In fact, later on this summer, kind of right around this area is where some of their project is going to happen, like right here at Wolf Creek. So just keep that in mind. Drive slow, cautious on the road. I know you are going to anyway. If you do see someone from the Redwood Rising Project side driving a little fast, please let me know and I will talk to who I need to talk to about that. So that's one of the things. Just keep in mind safety is a huge priority here in our park and also at Wolf Creek. So having to do with safety is food. So you probably chatted a little bit about that on the video. One of the things we're really cautious with at Wolf Creek, and you'll notice when you go to campgrounds and areas, there's a lot of crows, ravens, and Stellar's jays, right? And you see any of those birds here at the moment? No, it's because we're super careful with food. So one of the things, I know when you're out hiking around, you're going to take snacks and just be really, really careful if you're out and about on trails and things. One of those is that we don't want to attract really large wild animals into this area while we're here, right? Like bears, things like that. Even small critters. We also don't want to attract them into our cabins, so we try to keep food out of the cabins. Food can stay inside the lodge. Now, we don't usually have a problem with cars, I should mention that, but just keep the food covered. We're not like Yosemite, where you have to keep everything in bear boxes and everything, even in your cars. You can't even keep anything visible. We're not really like that, but it's because we're so cautious about the food. So just keep it inside the lodge, keep it in the or don't keep it in the cabins. We try to keep that with drinks too, flavored drinks, that kind of thing. But porch is great. You can have coffee out here, tea out here on the porch, that kind of thing. Now the reason for that, other than attracting large wild animals in, is that we actually have a couple of endangered species that this rule really, really helps out. One of them is the marbled murrelet. Has anyone ever heard of a marbled murrelet? It's a little ocean bird. So if you heard of murrelets, usually the place that they hang out is in the ocean. They're a seabird, right? So at some point in history, these little marbled murrelets, they're slightly bigger than this. They're about the size of a robin. Yes, this is the size of their egg. They only lay one egg, which I'll get to in just a minute. So they decided, marbled murrelets decided, we're not going to nest on these large cliffs with all the other seabirds because they're full. We don't want to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to find a large, big old tree, and that's where we're going to nest. So at some point in time, they flew into the old growth forest just offshore into big old trees and decided that they're going to nest on these big, nice tree branches, hundreds of feet in the air. So that's a pretty good system. There's not very many large predators. Unfortunately, when lots of trees started getting harvested, that was less, homes for these animals. But also another thing is when humans started coming and eating their snacks and food and leaving trash and bringing that into the forest, the crows, ravens, and Stellar's jays, who usually don't feed in deep into the forest, they followed a human's in. And so by eating and leaving food crumbs and things in the forest, those birds followed us in the forest. Now they have a new snack, a new lunch, if they find the egg and the chick of the marble murrelet, and they will actually eat them. So, but all is not lost, because by telling you about it, that's the biggest thing, is getting the message out there, letting you all know that this has been an issue in the past and continues to be an issue if people are not careful with food. So we keep it crumb clean. That's what we call it here in the park in Wolf Creek, is keeping it crumb clean, being really careful when you're out in the forest, especially being careful with food here at Wolf Creek. That's one of the reasons, because yes, they do. They only lay one single egg per year, so they only have one chick that they take care of. So be really careful with that food. Another reason, did you all know that we actually just reintroduced condors in this park? So California condors are very, very important to the Native American people in this area. We are actually currently on Yurok land, tribal land, historic land, and so Yurok people have lived here for thousands of years, which you're going to get to meet a man tomorrow, Dale Webster, who is part of the Yurok tribe, tribal member. And so hopefully, I don't know if you'll talk a little bit about condors or not, but I know you're going to be talking about them with Stephen. But just really quick, the condors, they're actually going to be getting, I think I heard 4 more in the fall potentially. So we currently have 8. So they're up in the Bald Hills area. I've heard they've been flying around. Their range is getting bigger and bigger since they were reintroduced. So they have been here for years and years. Condors are really, really, if you're not familiar with the California condor, they are a scavenger. As you can see, they look like a vulture, but they're much larger, 9 feet wingspan. They're really susceptible to human food. So that's one of the things, human food and trash. Because they're a scavenger, they eat just about anything. So if they pick up and eat human food and trash, that could potentially harm this animal. So because there's very few of them here, they are definitely an endangered species now in our park since we've reintroduced them. So that's another reason that we're careful with food here at Wolf Creek and this park, is because we have some endangered species. This is an important thing. And like I said, we also don't need to attract any large bears in this area while we're here. You can see them out in the forest, that's great. They can be out and about free, but we don't need to attract them here while we're hanging out. So food is a big one as you're hanging around. And yeah, so there's a lot of fun area. Just, I know you're gonna be keeping things clean, just keep it crumb clean if you're hiking around in the forest too. So that's the big one. Food is the big one. Let me just take a quick look at my notes here. There's fire extinguishers, there's all kinds of things. I know you're going to be going over.
Good luck song. They just have their own songs that the guys will just be sitting around singing.
Okay, so again, I'm Jason. I'm the forester at Redwood National Park, and there aren't many foresters that work for the National Park Service. So I don't know if did you give them kind of a rundown? Like my parents, for example, they think I work for the National Forestry Service, which doesn't exist, right? So, you know, and in this forestry institute for teachers that we did, we also had the superintendent from the Forest Service, the forest supervisor. And we try to explain to folks that these are completely under two different cabinets, right? The Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture. the National Park Service is under Department of the Interior. So it's run by two completely different cabinets in government.
I talked a little bit about the National Park Service being, preserve and protect mostly, and, and the Department of Agriculture, using the land and all of that. So I did mention
That's right.
that yours is a pretty unique position in the Park Service.
And that is the general kind of idea, is that Forest Service and BLM, they have more multiple use type of mandates, whereas we have what's often interpreted as more preservation, right? But the mission of the Park Service is to preserve unimpaired resources for this and future generations. That's a very tough thing to do. And in my opinion, it's really kind of the early laws in trying to promote sustainability, right? How do we get folks to use the national parks, but at the same time we have to maintain it at a certain level, right, of unimpairment, and that's very hard to do. Now, Redwood National Park is a very unique national park in that, in its enabling legislation, it was created to preserve all the old growth redwoods, right? That because there was only a very little bit of it left. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a map here. I don't know, Laura might have showed you something like this. Can you guys all see that? If you can't, just come on closer if you can.
It's really nice and big.
So this is Redwood National and State Parks combined. So it's just over 130,000 acres total. So that includes the state parks. And if you'll notice, there's this dark green color, right? And that dark green color is the old growth redwood that was that Congress was trying to protect, right? And then the lighter green color is all the areas that were logged before it became a national park. Okay, so that now we're kind of in this predicament where, we're supposed to be providing unimpaired resources for this and future generations, but now we have all this like second growth logged over areas that were really in different stages of impairment. So, and we'll go talk about what that looks like and what that is, what those impairments are.
Can you point to where we are?
Oh yeah, thank you. So we are, this little square was cut out. It's a 40-acre area, commonly known as the Whiskey 40. And it was cut out of, I think this is maybe the third largest contiguous old growth stand of redwoods remaining. And I think they saw the writing on the wall and they kind of came in and cut it out, right? You could see like these little patches. This is kind of like some of the last areas they were cutting. It's kind of hard to see. There's like this little teardrop where they were about to finish off a stand, and then that's when we came in and said, okay, it's done. It has officially become a national park, so everyone has to stop cutting. This area here, this was the original acquisition in 1968, so there are two acquisitions. The first one was in 1968, and this is called the Worm. So it was mostly a 1/4 acre on either side of Redwood Creek. So this is Redwood Creek running down. And then in 1978, because of all the logging pressures that was encroaching onto these areas that we had originally protected, we had the 78 Expansion Act, and that's what created a more national park boundary. It stretched it from to the topographic divide of Redwood Creek to encompass most of Redwood Creek, or the bottom portion of Redwood Creek. And in that legislation, there was something really unique in it, in that it actually says that we have to rehabilitate the land. And that's the first time that that's ever happened in any setting. So Redwood National Park really is kind of a restoration park. And it took us a little while to figure out, well, what does that mean, right? And how do we do that? So I think we're going to walk in here and we're going to kind of talk about, we're going to use our powers of observation, and we're going to and say it again. just kidding. Okay, so again, I'm Jason. I'm the forester at Redwood National Park, and There aren't many foresters that work for the National Park Service, so I don't know if, did you give them kind of a rundown? Like, my parents, for example, they think I work for the National Forestry Service, which doesn't exist, right? So, you know, and in this forestry institute for teachers that we did, we also had the superintendent from the Forest Service, the forest supervisor. And we try to explain to folks that these are completely under two different cabinets, right? The Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture. The National Park Service is under the Department of the Interior. So it's run by two completely different cabinets in government.
I talked a little bit about the National Park Service being, you know, preserve and protect mostly, and, you know, and the Department of Agriculture, you know, using the land and all of that. So I did mention
That's right.
that yours is a pretty unique position in the Park Service.
And that is the general kind of idea, is that, you know, Forest Service and BLM, they have more multiple use type of mandates, whereas we have what's often interpreted as more preservation, right? But the mission of the Park Service is to preserve unimpaired resources for this and future generations. That's a very tough thing to do. And in my opinion, it's really kind of the early laws in trying to promote sustainability, right? How do we get folks to use the national parks, but at the same time we have to maintain it at a certain level, right, of unimpairment, and that's very hard to do. Now, Redwood National Park is a very unique national park in that, in its enabling legislation, it was created to preserve all the old growth redwoods, right? That because there was only a very little bit of it left. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a map here. I don't know, Laura might have showed you something like this. Can you guys all see that? If you can't, just come on closer if you can.
It's really nice and big.
So this is Redwood National and State Parks combined. So it's just over 130,000 acres total. So that includes the state parks. And if you'll notice, there's this dark green color, right? And that dark green color is the old growth redwood that was that Congress was trying to protect, right? And then the lighter green color is all the areas that were logged before it became a national park. Okay, so that now we're kind of in this predicament where, you know, we're supposed to be providing unimpaired resources for this and future generations, but now we have all this like second growth logged over areas that were really in different stages of impairment. So, and we'll go talk about what that looks like and what that is, what those impairments are.
Can you point to where we are?
Oh yeah, thank you. So we are, this little square was cut out. It's a 40-acre area, commonly known as the Whiskey 40. And it was cut out of, I think this is maybe the third largest contiguous old growth stand of redwoods remaining. And I think they saw the writing on the wall and they kind of came in and cut it out, right? You could see like these little patches. This is kind of like some of the last areas they were cutting. It's kind of hard to see. There's like this little teardrop where they were about to finish off a stand, and then that's when we came in and said, okay, it's done. It has officially become a national park, so everyone has to stop cutting. This area here, this was the original acquisition in 1968, so there are two acquisitions. The first one was in 1968, and this is called the Worm. So it was mostly a 1/4 acre on either side of Redwood Creek. So this is Redwood Creek running down. And then in 1978, because of all the logging pressures that was encroaching onto these areas that we had originally protected, we had the 78 Expansion Act. And that's what created a more national park boundary. It stretched it from to the topographic divide of Redwood Creek to encompass most of Redwood Creek, or the bottom portion of Redwood Creek. And in that legislation, there was something really unique in it, in that it actually says that we have to rehabilitate the land, and that's the first time that that's ever happened in any setting. So Redwood National Park really is kind of a restoration park, and it took us a little while to figure out, well, what does that mean, right? And how do we do that? So I think we're gonna walk in here and we're gonna kind of talk about, we're gonna use our powers of observation, and we're going to, as a teacher, like when I was studying forestry, I came up here to study kind of industrial forestry, right? I was gonna go into learning how to industrially manage stands of timber. And it was one professor, his name was Gail Thornburg, who was really kind of my mentor. And he kind of pulled me aside, and it was him, a teacher, that said, hey, I think that you can do something different, because he kind of knew who I was. And he said, why don't you take the principles that we're teaching you here in terms of forestry and apply it to a conservation setting? And I said, man, that's really kind of a cool concept. And in one of our field trips that we did out here, we came to this stand, the Whiskey 40, and they had just did this a demonstration thinning out here, and the grad student had left and never finished the thesis. So I thought, man, this is probably a cool opportunity for me to come in and finish the study, and then I could publish the paper, and you know, I could get a thesis out of it. So I did my undergrad there, and then I did my graduate work studying this stand that we're looking at here. And then that transitioned into a permanent position in the national park, which is a really cool opportunity. I'm super thankful for the opportunity to do this. It's really awesome, and to be the forester, and to be able to innovate and bring different methods of managing the forest in a national park setting, where traditionally we don't use tools like forestry. So it's really cool, really innovative. And again, it all ties into the fact that we are kind of a restoration park, and that it's in our mandate. It's in our mandate to do restoration. So that's kind of my background. But anyways, enough about me. So, yes, was it yesterday you guys saw some old growth?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So how does this differ from what you saw? Now you can see what was the old growth, right? These big trees that you were talking about kind of are now stumps, right? So they came in here and they clear cut the entire forest down. Well, I'll talk about that a little bit more. Let's talk about what you guys are seeing.
They're tall and skinny. Skinny.
And there's way more of them. Densely. They're a lot closer together.
Skinny trees, very dense. So a lot of trees, not a lot of open space.
Down on the ground, but not like a lot of dead things on the ground.
A lot of dead things on the ground, like right? Yes. So
No lush ferns and things.
so we talked about kind of the survival for competition. So there's a lot of competition happening. The losers are losing, the winners are starting to kind of take over. You said not a lot of...
lush on the ground.
Nothing happening on the forest floor, right? Awesome. These are great observations.
Like broken branches along the...
Broken branches along the trunks of the tree. Yeah, very good. Okay, so let's talk about some of this stuff. So, you know, when we think about a healthy forest, as a forester, when I'm coming in and I'm trying to assess some of these second growth stands and trying to figure out what's healthy, what's not, I look at all these things that you guys just mentioned in your observations. So we look at density, right? How many trees are there in an area? That's not the only measure of density. There's a lot of other ways to measure crown competition and stem crowding in a stand. But, you know, for easy purposes to understand, you know, numbers of trees is important. It is definitely a metric that we look at. Okay, so when you look at a tree, and someone mentioned the diameters, you know, they're really skinny trees, right? So the tree diameter is often going to be proportional to the tree's crown diameter, right? So if a tree has a lot of lateral growing space, then it's going to be able to create more food. So more lateral growing space, right? More branch area, more crown volume. So there's more crown volume. That means there's more leaves on the tree, right? And the leaves are what produces food for the tree. Okay, so you have more crown volume, you have more leaves. You have more leaves, then you have more photosynthetic factory. You have more photosynthetic factory, you have more food for the tree, and then the tree gets to grow. Okay, so larger diameters, larger crowns, larger diameters. Okay, the other thing we look at is the crown, what we call the crown ratio. So what percent of the entire tree, like if this is the tree here, what percent of the tree has live branches on it, right? How deep is the live crown? We call that live crown ratio. And so when you're in that old growth forest and you're looking at those old growth trees, I mean, we're talking super deep, right? We're talking, you know, the photosynthetic factor of just one old growth tree, it's immense. There's an immense amount of energy it's producing for itself. It's unbelievable. It's probably more than the entire forest here. Okay, so when you're looking at that, really deep crowns, but when you're looking at this, you know, when you're looking at the trees here, like how much percent of the bole of the tree would you say is covered by live crown? Like 15%, 20%, 10%?
Yeah.
Okay, so textbook wise, we would say a healthy tree should have at least 30% canopy, crown class, right? The crown ratio should be about 30%. And here, like you guys are saying, it's easily less than 20, right? So not a lot of photosynthetic factory. So the trees are crowded in, right? And that's why they don't have a lot of growing space. And then because of that, we're having small diameter growth, we're having small crown ratios. And one of the big issues here is that kind of the limiting factor to growth, like in this ecosystem, in other ecosystems, what limits growth can be a lot of different things. Here it's not water, it's not nutrients, it's really sunlight and the amount of light that each tree is getting. So when these trees are in this heavy state of competition, it's going to take whatever little amount of photosynthate that it's creating for itself, and it's going to put it into height growth, right? So these trees are doing nothing but getting taller and not putting much into the diameter. And then that becomes a problem, because then now we start having trees that are too tall for their diameters to support, and then you get mortality. So then the trees start dying out, which could be a good thing, like this guy, right, exactly. Which could be a good thing. We want to see disturbance in the forest because we want to see the forest thin itself. Now, how did we get here? How did this happen? This stand was initiated in 1962. So in 1962, they came in, they clear cut it. I'm sorry?
That aerial seeding? Or
Yes, so then they cut all the trees down and then they burned it, because they're trying to just clear out all the all the logging slash and debris. So they burned that all off, and then they flew over in helicopters and dumped out thousands and thousands of seed. And a lot of the seed sources were mostly Douglas fir. So Douglas fir is are these guys right here. You could see those two trees right there are Douglas fir with the paint on it and the tag. So that's Douglas fir. I should have brought my laser pointer. It also had redwood, and it also had Sitka spruce, which is this guy here. You could always tell Sitka spruce by the potato chip bark. Okay, Sitka spruce, which doesn't belong here. So it's native to the park, but it's not necessarily native to this area of the park. And then there was also Port Orford cedar, which is this guy right here. See that little weepy tree kind of right there? Yeah. That is Port Orford cedar, which definitely doesn't belong here. So that they added that in. I'm sorry?
Port Orford.
Port Orford cedar, yeah.
So who's they? Who dropped?
It was a timber industry. It was the
Oh, so it was not
landowners.
the park.
It was not the park. No.
okay.
So
I
this
was
is before it became a national park.
Why introduce all those other trees that don't belong here?
Yeah. So that's a good question, and they were looking at one, Douglas fir was kind of like.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, why did they intermix the species in the seed source? And I don't really know the answer to that fully, but I do know that most of the seed was Douglas fir, and Douglas fir was kind of the big commercial species at the time. or building. It's a really good building material.
Sorry, can I ask a basic question? So were they thinking we're making more resource for us to come and cut down, or did the government make them do that?
No. That was all. We're planting it, and then later on they would probably end up thinning it a little bit so that the trees grow larger, and then they would clear cut it again, and then restart the process.
Okay.
But then it became a national park before they had any chance to do that.
So are they choosing trees that were fast growing?
Well, Doug fir definitely is a fast growing tree, and that is another issue with the seed mixture, because when you look at the different types of trees, different trees have different shade intolerances. So some trees can handle shade better than other trees. Redwood is classed as moderately shade intolerant, so it can kind of hang out in the understory for a little longer than other species. Douglas fir is shade intolerant, and when you're a shade intolerant species, you have to outgrow everything else faster to give yourself a competitive advantage, right? And because Doug fir was planted so heavily, it's definitely an impediment to trying to turn it back into a redwood forest, right? So 80% of what you're looking at here is probably Doug fir. So number of trees, we were kind of talking about that. So that's one of the metrics that we use to evaluate a stand. And here you're looking at about 1,000 trees in an acre. Does everyone know what an acre is? So an acre, it's 43,560 square feet is an acre, right? It's about 208 feet. If it's a square, it's about 208 feet by 208 feet if it were a square, right? And within that square, there's about an average of 1,000 trees per acre here. Now, in that old growth that you looked at yesterday, if you counted like the number of dominant trees in the stand, you're probably looking somewhere in the 30 to 70 range. Wow. Right? So it's fewer trees that are taking up all the resources. Here, we have 1,000 trees with only so much resource to go around, and that's why you have a bunch of tiny trees. Any questions?